Hello everyone, welcome back to Trek Mission Log, and I want to thank you for joining me on yet another Star Trek episode review. Now, whether this is your first time or if you've been with me from the beginning, welcome. Earlier this week, I posted my 100 subscriber giveaway video on the channel, and I will link that in the description below. Monday, October 31st, the winner will be announced through an online random comment selection tool. So please check out that video and don't miss out on a chance to win a very cool prize, which is highlighted in that video. If you enjoy this content, would you please go ahead and hit subscribe? It would really mean a lot to me personally, and it would help this channel out immensely. Also, I am on Instagram. You can type at Trek Mission Log and you'll find me there. Now today I'm going to be reviewing the original series Season 1, Episode 25, titled This Side of Paradise. It originally aired on March the 1st, 1967. It was written by Nathan Butler and D.C. Fontana with a teleplay by D.C. Fontana, was produced by Gene L. Kuhn, and directed by Ralph Sinensky. So without any further ado, let's dive in. The Enterprise is approaching planet Omicron Ceti 3. Omicron. Where have I heard that name before? Uhura keeps sending greetings, but all she receives is dead air, and Kirk orders her to continue. Kirk approaches Spock. He asks about the 150 people in the colony and their chances of survival. And Spock mentions that they were victims to something called Bertol rays. It disintegrates living animal tissue. And so the colony that was there could not have survived, as they've been there for 3 years. Spock said that they could beam people down only for a limited time because of the exposure to these rays. And so the landing party beams down to Omicron and notice that they are 6 feet apart. Good men. Listen, I will stop with the jokes, I promise, okay? As they look around, they find wooden structures and wagons, and it looks like it's a pre-industrial type of atmosphere. And they speak amongst each other as to how all the survivors are gone. Suddenly, inhabitants do show up, and the leader, named Elias, welcomes them to this planet. We then fade to the title sequence. Now, they seem legitimately happy to see the crew of the Enterprise. They said that they haven't seen any other human beings in 4 years since they left Earth to establish this colony. Now, the landing party conjecture as to why there are survivors, especially with the deadly Bertol rays that was mentioned earlier. Elias, the man who greeted them, explained that the colonists had split into 2 groups in case of disease. The other group could survive. Just then, a young lady walks in, and she is completely taken by Mr. Spock. Her name is Layla, and she said that her and Mr. Spock know each other. Indeed, Spock does recognize her. And as Kirk witnesses this, he does not look too impressed. Probably because his chances of kissing this young lady have now gone down the tubes. Now, Elias said that they have complete peace and harmony here on this planet. Now, outside, the landing party are searching, trying to find answers as to how they could still be alive. Sulu and another officer come to a barn, and there is a flower there, unnoticed by these men. And as they're there, the flower turns almost as if it is looking at them, but they don't notice it. But one thing they do notice is that there is no animals anywhere to be seen. Elias and Layla are talking about Spock and how she had feelings for him, but he certainly did not reciprocate those feelings. And Elias asked her if she wanted him to stay with them, and she said Spock has no choice. He will stay. McCoy gives Kirk a report that he has examined 9 men, and they are textbook healthy, as in no health defects whatsoever. Spock calls in from out in the field, and he said that there is a lack of life other than the colonists, and he's trying to find answers with his tricorder. Elias shows Kirk the crops that they are planting there. The soil is very fertile and will grow anything they plant. Another officer comes up to Kirk and said they have enough crops to sustain the colony, but very little more. There are not a lot of crops. McCoy summons Kirk. McCoy noticed that one of the colonists had scar tissue on a lung 4 years ago, as well as an appendectomy. Yet when McCoy recently examined him, absolutely no sign of scar tissue, and the appendix had returned. Out in the field, Layla approaches Spock. He questions her how none of this makes sense. She offered to show him how they survived, but only if he tried to understand why they loved their way of life so much. Kirk told Elias that he had received orders from Starfleet that the colonists had to be evacuated, but Elias refuses to go. Layla leads Spock to one of the flowers that Sulu was near. She mentioned how its spores brought them peace and love, and just then, the flower spits out its spores on Spock. Spock seems disoriented, he's in pain, and then suddenly a contentment encompasses Spock, and he proclaims his love for Layla, and in the style of Captain James T. Kirk, this happens. Kirk orders Sulu to have landing parties beam down to begin organizing the colonists for evacuation. And they notice that Spock is missing. Kirk tries to hail him on the communicator, but Spock is not responding. You see, he is otherwise engaged. Now, Layla finally picks up the communicator and opens it, and Spock says to Kirk, yes, Jim, what do you want? And Kirk orders him to report in 10 minutes to help with the evacuation, and Spock refuses to cooperate, much to the chagrin of Kirk and McCoy. Now, Kirk orders McCoy to help with the evacuation, while he and Sulu and another officer leave to look for Spock. They begin their search, and it doesn't take long to find Spock, and they are surprised at what they see. They find him hanging upside down from a tree and having a good time. While the landing party is gathering the colonists, Officer DeSalle brings a couple of suspicious flowers to McCoy for him to examine. Meanwhile, Kirk orders Spock to cooperate, but he refuses. Instead, Spock leads them to the flowers, and in a very quick moment, they spit their spores all over the 3 of them. Sulu and the other officer are infected, but somehow Kirk isn't. When he catches up with McCoy, McCoy has been affected by the spores as well. And Kirk discovers that 100 of the flowers have been beamed aboard the ship. And so Kirk beams up. As he comes to the bridge, he notices that Uhura has been affected, and she has sabotaged the communication system so that they can only communicate with people on the planet, but not with Starfleet Command. In fact, it seems like the whole crew is under the spell of these spores. And Kirk now realizes he is alone. The crew are deserting the ship to go join the colony on the planet. Kirk calls down to McCoy and asks for his help in finding a way to counteract the effects of the spores. And McCoy responded, "Who wants to counteract paradise, Jim boy?" Kirk beams down and he sees Spock enjoying a tea with Elias. Kirk asked about the plants, and Spock said the spores of those plants drifted through space until they landed on Omicron. They thrive on the Bertol rays of that planet. The plants house the spores until they find a body to inhabit. And when they do, Elias said they give the host complete health and peace of mind. Now, this is a key conversation in this episode. Spock said that they have no wants or needs, but on this planet there is love and belonging. And Kirk argued that people stagnate when they have no ambition. Kirk said that he's going back to the ship, and he beams up to an empty ship. And we see a great shot of the bridge showing all of the ship's operations, but no one to operate them. In a futile attempt, Kirk tries calling the different ship's departments. All the crew are gone. And he sits in a chair and records the captain's log. He mentions in his log that he is marooned here. And after his comments, we see that he is frightened, overwhelmed, and alone. At this point, a plant on the ship shoots spores on Kirk. This will be the second time. Kirk smiles, and it appears that he too is infected. He calls Spock and said that he has joined them, and now he understands. He wants to pack a few things, and then he will beam down. And as Kirk goes through his belongings, he finds a medal that he received. He smiles. The smile then leaves his face, and he makes his way to the transporter room. And all of a sudden, he is struggling. It appears that he is fighting the effects of the spores. With firm resolve, he successfully counteracts the effects, and he discovers that his violent emotions and his anger are the key to counteracting the spores. His plan is to first work on Spock. He convinces Spock to beam up, and when Spock materializes, Kirk tries to stir up angry emotions in him. He called him an inhuman, computerized half-breed. Kirk keeps calling him names, but Spock laughs it off. Finally, Kirk starts to get an emotional response out of Spock by talking about the Vulcan race, specifically Spock's father. Kirk is shouting out insults. Now, of course, he doesn't mean any of it. He's trying to get Spock to get angry so that the effects of the spores can be counteracted. And it is indeed working. Spock gets angry. And finally, Spock attacks him. And a fight ensues in the transporter room. Spock is about to attack Kirk with a metal chair, and then the effects of the spores wear off, and he comes back to himself. The effects of the spores are gone. We almost see a look of remorse on Spock's face for allowing the spores to overtake him and for almost seriously injuring his captain. Kirk asks Spock if he can rig a subsonic pulse that can be sent through ship's communicators to trigger the violent responses in the people on the planet. Spock said that it can be done, and they get to work on it. Now, on the planet, McCoy goes to stand beside Layla, who is waiting patiently for Spock to return. McCoy calls up to the ship, and Spock answers, and Layla begins speaking to him. She asks to be beamed aboard, and Spock prepares to beam her aboard. When she materializes, she hugs him, but he does not return it. She begs him to return to the planet with her, and she professes her love for him. but he does not reciprocate. Through her sadness and those emotions, the effects of the spores have worn off of her. Kirk and Spock continue working on the communicators. Spock said this should begin working on the nerves of the crew in just a few moments, and indeed it begins to work. On the planet, these two start fighting. These guys start fighting. McCoy picks a fight with Elias, and on all of them, the spores have lost their effect, even on Elias. Elias said once he came to his senses, they've had no progress or accomplishments and have wasted 3 years of their lives. Kirk's attempt was a success. Elias wants to speak with Kirk, and he tells Kirk that they will cooperate in every way to be transported off the planet to Starbase 27, where from there they will be relocated to a new planet to start over. Everybody beams aboard. Ship's operations resume. And as the Enterprise is leaving, McCoy says to Kirk, "That's the second time man has been kicked out of paradise." A reference to Adam and Eve being thrown out of the Garden of Eden after they sinned against God. Kirk responded by saying, No, Bones, this time we walked out on our own." He went on to talk about how maybe our purpose is to claw and strife and scratch our way through life. He then looks at Spock and asked about his thoughts on Omicron Ceti 3. Spock says, "I have no comment other than for the first time in my life, I was happy." The ship then sails away from the planet and on to Starbase 27. Well, how do you follow up an amazing episode like A Taste of Armageddon, which I reviewed last time and I gave 5 out of 5? Well, naturally you follow that up with a awful episode like This Side of Paradise. I hope that you'll forgive me, but so far out of the original series, this is my least favorite episode. Now, I will start with the good elements and then get to the things that I didn't like. Firstly, I found the concept of the spores which these flowers housed was quite intriguing. An interesting story of spores traveling through space until they find a planet where they could thrive. Omicron Ceti 3 had something called Bertol rays which the spores needed, and so the spores made their way there and planted in the soil, and away they grew. It's almost as if these spores had intelligence. Now, I felt that this element of the story was very good. It was a story that could have further been explored here, but instead we see only the effects of the spores on people. And so in regards to balance in storytelling, the scales were tilted in one direction when they could have gone in a different direction. Now, Leonard Nimoy's performance in this episode absolutely stole the show. The spores affected him, and he became the exact opposite of his character. And I have to admit, it was quite comical, especially when we saw him hanging on a tree limb like a monkey. When he got hit with the spores, he did a good job of showing the pain he was going through. And later, when Kirk got him to be angry, Nimoy portrayed that very, very well. The best scene in this episode, in my opinion, was when Kirk beamed back to an empty ship. The camera shots of the bridge mixed with the musical score made for a very moving and sad moment, and Shatner indeed did a fine job of showing the fear and at being at a loss as to know what to do. You could feel the desperation. All of us have had moments like that in our lives where we faced a tough situation and we didn't know what to do. And I really felt that Shatner did a great job in that and was very, very relatable. Now, those were the good elements of this episode. Now to the things that I didn't like. First of all, Spock. Now, in past episodes, when confronted with his emotions taking over, he struggled deeply. Now, he did here, but it went by very, very quickly. I think it would have been more congruent with his character if the struggle of the spores taking over his mental state lasted longer, and we seen the struggle taking a longer time. Would have been more believable. Anyway, given the circumstances, Nimoy did a great job. Also, when McCoy was overcome with the spores, which we didn't see happen, by the way, he reverted to talking like an old cowboy. Phrases like Jim Boy and hello there, little Layla. Please forgive me, but I found that very annoying. I also noticed an inconsistency as well. Later in the episode, Kirk said to Spock that if he beams down, there's no way of them ever being able to beam back up, meaning that there's nobody in a transporter room. But a little bit earlier, Kirk beams up to an empty ship. If the ship was empty and the crew were all down on the planet, how did he get up there? Now, I found that a little bit odd. Perhaps the transporter operator was the last person to be affected by the spores. I don't know. That wasn't explained. Now, you've heard me mention before that Star Trek is better as an ensemble. And there was a lot of time spent in this episode on characters that have never been a part of Star Trek before. In fact, Scotty was not in this episode at all. And we are now 25 episodes in, and we have yet to meet Mr. Chekhov. The philosophical discussion at the end I also didn't like. McCoy mentioned that this was the second time that people were kicked out of paradise. Again, a reference to Adam and Eve, the first couple of the Bible. They were kicked out of paradise, McCoy says. Well, the truth is, they were not kicked out of paradise. They were removed from a garden where they were looked after by God because of their disobedience. Because of that, life became tiresome and full of toil and labor. And Kirk alluded to that when he said that maybe we were meant to live our lives toiling through every situation. At the risk of perhaps losing some followers on this channel, and I hope that's not the case, as a Christian, I believe that our Creator made us with a plan and that our lives have great purpose. Not to kick us out of paradise, but to bring us to it and to Himself someday. Now, finally, I could mention more things, but the episode moved very, very slowly, and in some cases, scenes stretched on way too long, like the romantic scenes between Spock and Layla. It took up a lot of screen time, even with the extras who are not a part of Star Trek. I felt the episode was choppy. It had a few enjoyable moments, but I found myself losing interest throughout. And so because of this, I give This Side of Paradise 2 out of 5 Starfleet insignias for awesomeness. Definitely, there are better episodes out there. Well, that wraps up this episode of Trek Mission Log, and I hope that you enjoyed my review. Please feel free to leave a comment below. I love reading them. Even if you disagree with my assessment, that's okay. We can agree to disagree agreeably. All I ask is that we remain respectful of each other and keep the comments profanity free. Also, don't forget to get in on the giveaway. The link for that video is in the description below. And please plan to join me next week as I review the episode titled The Devil in the Dark. Sounds intriguing. Until we meet again, live long and prosper.